This video is entitled Use Case Analysis, and it goes along with our core systems analysis and design. This is a companion for my lecture on Chapter 4 of the book Systems Analysis and Design 7th edition by Dennis, Wixom, and Roth. And I'm Dr. Renaud from Shawnee State University, and I'll be taking you through this presentation on use case analysis. Use case analysis is a little different than some other ways to analyze a system. What this is all about is analyzing how we're going to use the system, not necessarily what we want the system to do. What we're going to do is we're going to create a series of business scenarios, and a business scenario is basically a use case. It's a case of or a story of how we're going to use the system. These use cases will need to include the functional requirements for things we want the system to do, functions within the use case. The use case also should include exceptions. When the user has a problem or when something happens, we need to include the exceptions. We need to also include special cases in our use case and how we handle errors that happen through the process of using this part of the system. So that's a use case model. Use cases are event driven. There's a trigger. There's something that happened. A user logs into the system. Well, that would be an event. A user clicks this button. That would be an event. We need to start a new mortgage loan process, creating an account, whatever. That's a process. That's an event that happens. So the whole use case modeling is all dealing with these events and these triggers. Think about the steps to buy a pop machine from a soda fountain, from a soda machine. Think of the steps to get money or check your balance at an ATM machine. Think about the steps to register for a class at the university or drop a class at the university. And think of like the steps to remove an item from your online shopping cart. There are certain things you've got to do, and there are steps and there are exceptions. For instance, if you're registering for a class, one of the exception would be there are no available seats. Well, crap. Well, that's an exception. So that needs to be listed in the use case. Maybe it conflicts with your schedule. Well, would that be an exception that we have in our use case? So when we're designing these use cases, when we're writing them out, remember we need to be thinking of the triggering event and we need to be thinking of how the system is being used. Not what we want it to do, but what exactly do we need it to do in the use case? There are two common templates for writing out a use case. There's the casual and then the fully dressed. I'm going to talk about the casual use case template, and this template is available for you to download, or you can create a template similar to this. This is a common template. Your mileage may vary. Different organizations have their own templates. You and your development group or your user group may create a template that looks a little bit different, but they usually have all of this kind of information. Create this early and then continue to update it and refine it as you learn more information about the processes, you learn more information about how the system is to be used. This will always continue to upgrade, continue to modify and be updated. Let's look at the boxes here. Each use case should have a name. It should have just a several word, very clear name. In most systems, we also will give a use case an ID or an ID number. Maybe use case 1, use case 2, and then use case 1.1 and 1.2 for subcases. We may create kind of subsystems of A1 and B3, B1 and B2, depending upon different groups. I don't know, that's up to you and your analysis and user group. Priority is also kind of something that you and your analysis group designs and decides what are the priorities, low, medium, high, 1 through 10. I don't know. Just be consistent. Now, the actor is the person that is actually using the system in this use case. The actor should not be a job title. The actor should not be the actor should specifically be who is using it. So think about the actor as the person who's doing this. Um, Description would be a place where you would write a paragraph or several sentences describing the use case and kind of filling out the use case name. Then the question is a trigger. Triggers come in two general types, an external trigger and a temporal trigger. Let me just say a temporal trigger is a trigger that's time-based, based upon what's a day. Maybe you've got a process that reconciles something. Well, that would be a use case. Reconcile the whatever. And that would be a temporal trigger because it happens regularly. Or is it an external trigger, like a new customer wants to sign in to your website? We need to create an account. Boom. That would be an external trigger. What are the preconditions? Are there use cases that need to happen before this use case can happen? For instance, in the idea of register for a class, you have to be in the student database already first. So the person has to be added as a student. Okay. The person has to not have um, any holds on their account, because if you have a financial hold or other hold, you can't register for a class. Maybe the precondition is the class must be in the system. So we list what preconditions should happen before. And by sitting down and thinking about these preconditions and postconditions, which are the conditions that have to exist after the use case is complete, we become a lot smarter about how they all fit together. And that's really doing a serious analysis of the system, thinking about all of these preconditions and postconditions and how everything sequences and fits. The nominal course um, is where you would put a bulleted list or a numbered list of what normally happens at this use case. Boom, 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 boom. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. And put any information for each of those steps that you might need to out beside it. If it's more detailed, write a sentence for each of these steps. And then at the end, there's exceptions. The exceptions are where we put down, well, the class is full. Okay, that's an exception. Students gone over the number of hours. That's an exception. If this was a use case for getting money out of the ATM, well, the ATM is run out of money. Well, that would be an exception. The account doesn't have enough balance. That would be an exception. So you can see that we also need to list all of those. So this isn't just something you can do willy-nilly or after the fact. This is something you need to start early and always be refining these use cases. They grow organically as you do your analysis. So the casual use case is where you will often start, but the fully dressed use case is where we will probably be at by the end of the analysis phase. It's very thought out. It's very detailed. It includes all of the data that has to flow as well as the processes. For instance, you can see that we've added information for the steps. We've added an area called alternative courses. So in the nominal course, which nominal means normal, in the normal course of the activity, we do this and we do this and we do this, and the system does this and we do this. But in each one of those cases, data is going to be needed, information is going to be needed, or information will be retrieved or extracted or generated. So information for steps needs to show an arrow and show what information is needed. For instance, a user wants to log into the system. That would be a use case. Well, Nominal step 1, user types in user ID and password and hits login. Step 2, validate the login. So what information needs to come from the database to validate the information? Well, the user ID and maybe a hash of the password so that we can validate that, yes, in fact, it really is the user. Then information would go back to the server saying, yes, that was a successful login. We need to update his cookies or update the database or whatever. So you can see that in each of those steps, there's going to be data flowing in and out. The alternative course or courses would be, there's a different way to do that. Maybe they did this instead of this. Maybe the alternative course was a paper document. Maybe it was some other kind of document. Again, there could be multiple alternative courses, not just one. So you may have multiple lists of bullets there under alternative courses. Post conditions, preconditions, exceptions, trigger, actor, those are all the same. And then down at the bottom, when we go look at the information from steps up at the nominal course, we come back down to the bottom then and say, well, the user ID and password, where does that come from? Well, that comes from the user database. So that would be down there with it as an input and a source. And then if there's an output of the use case, we need to put the name of the output in the source. So here we're starting to analyze the individual bits or blocks or pieces of data and information that are flowing in and out of this use case. And again, you're not going to sit down and write one of these at the very beginning. This isn't the first thing you do. The first thing you do would be just to make a bulleted list of the various use cases you're thinking of. Maybe do a use case diagram that I'm going to show you in the next presentation. Then start writing the casual use cases and start collecting the documents, the information, the understanding, and by the time you're done, you will have grown into a fully dressed use case, as you see here. Use cases, you may start a use case and then go, man, that is complex. Well, don't be afraid to take that use case and split it up into multiple cases. You can decompose a single use case into multiple. Use cases often have a flow from one use case to the next use case. For instance, think of an e-commerce site where a user signs in and then searches for an item and then browses items and reviews an item and adds it to the cart. And he may jump back up and browse more items and add them to the cart, or search for more items and add them to the cart. And then finally there's a checkout. But you can see that each of these use cases kind of connect and have a flow to them. So when you're laying out your use cases, think about that also. Just some notes on use cases. Remember, your use case won't be perfect on the first version. They'll be refined as you dig in, as you learn more, as you do more of your analysis, as you do more of your interviewing and your questionnaires and all of the other things you're going to do. These use cases will grow and change. Remember also that you're writing them for two groups simultaneously. You're writing them so that the user understands how they use the system, because the user is telling you, well, I want to use the system to do this and this and this. You're also writing this use case for your systems people, for your other analysts, for your programmers and all of that, so they can understand how the system is to be used. And you need to balance the needs of both groups as you're writing these use cases. Um, and also for little tiny simple things that the business understands, the analyst understands, the users understand, and for some of those little piddly little things, a use case might not be needed. You don't have to get your use cases down to every single little bitty thing your system does. The big things, the important things, absolutely. but you don't have to decompose the system all the way down to every single click being a use case. So again, how do we create a use case, or how do we create our use cases to describe a system? Well, what we need to do is identify the use cases. Just create a bulleted list, create a numbered list, create a pile of 3x5 cards, whatever you do, Word document, spreadsheet, and identify the cases. This is something the system does. This is something the system does. This is some, and kind of put boundaries around each of them. Know that the cases will bump up against each other, but make sure they don't overlap too much. Then go in and create a casual form and add the major steps to the case. Then take that casual form and start adding elements, adding all of the things, the data flows, the triggers, the inputs, the outputs, and all of those things. And as you're doing steps 1, 2, and 3, also always be confirming the use cases that you've created and where you are in your analysis with your users, with experts, and with the other people in your systems development in group. That's kind of a real simple how to. The book has a really nice explanation, but and I think you should read it. It's a really good explanation, but I wanted to give you this quick and dirty, simple how-to to talk about use cases. This concludes my presentation on use cases. I'd like to say thank you for watching. This presentation is copyright 2020 by James Imbrano, PhD. All rights are reserved. The use case templates come from the Systems Analysis and Design 7th edition textbook by Dennis Wixom Roth, published by Wiley.